Good afternoon. Betty Shan again. And it was good to look and see that I have 190, oh, here we go, 199 subscribers. I like one more having 200, and that makes me very proud. And I appreciate all of you that have subscribed, and I appreciate y'all that watch that don't want to subscribe, but it's good to have you join me today. And it's been a nice day outside. It's 96 degrees, and that sure beats 110 by a long ways. So anyway, we're going to see what we can talk about today and hope some of this makes a little bit of sense to you. And I was outside in my yard watering, and I got to thinking back about my daddy. He watered out in his yard after he retired. He would sit in his lawn chair and just use the sprinkler on his garden a lot of times, and sometimes he'd water his pecan trees that way. But he'd sit in his chair, and it got to where when he was out there, he'd pick up a few old pecans that had been left over from last season, and he'd sit there and he'd crack them open, and he'd pull the goodies out, and down would come the dove. And they got to where a lot of them would come up and just eat them right out of his hands. He didn't have to, try to get them to. They just come down and eat out of his hand, and then they drink water out of his water hose as he was out there. And to me, that was a beautiful sight to see my daddy outside feeding the birds and watering the birds when he was watering his yard. And then that brought back a memory of my husband, Edgel. He was outside one time, and he was sprinkling around some water and watering, and we had an uninvited visitor come, and it was a parrot. And he was out there, and that parrot would sit in a tree and call to him kind of, and do their rackets they make, at him and everything. And Edgar would just talk back to him real sweet. And finally he come in the house, and I don't remember exactly what he got, but he got something he knew the parrot would eat. And he went back outside and he started talking to it. Well, here it come. It flew down. It was hungry. And he started eating out of Edgel's hands. The next thing I knew, I had a parrot in my house. And of course, we didn't have no cage. We didn't have no food. We didn't have nothing for the bird. But he would say that they put him in an office. We had an office that was kind of added to our house that we'd put up because my husband at that time was selling American National Insurance and securities, and he needed a place to file his papers. So he let the bird in the house, and he knew right quick we was going to have a pen to keep him in. And Edgel said, well, I know this is somebody's pet, but I don't know what to do with it. If we let it go, a dog or a cat's liable to get it, and we didn't want that happening to that bird. So he went down to, we had a pet store at that time, and he went down to the pet store and got to quizzing them on who might have a parrot that they've lost, thinking somebody may have reported it there. Well, nobody knew anything about a parrot. So he bought a parrot cage, a great big cage for that bird. Of course, it was a big bird. It wasn't no little bitty bird. And he brought that thing home, and of course, we bought feed for it, and we bought those sticks that had all kinds of nuts on it that they could pull them nuts off of it. And of course, the kids had to buy a toy or two. And anyway, we set that bird up in our office in there. And for the first few days, that bird would go in his cage, and he would eat, and he would sing, and he would talk a little bit, but it would be, hello, how are you? Something like that, just talk. The parrot talked. And of course, that was amazing to our kids. And they were just thrilled to death, and they didn't want nobody claiming that bird. We kept telling them, now, this is not our bird. We're just keeping it for somebody. That bird's got loose, and it don't know where to go back to. And we had to try to convince them, that we were doing the right thing by keeping the bird, so it wouldn't be killed by a dog or a cat or something. So anyway, for several days there, we had it in that office, and we done just fine with it. Then all of a sudden, that bird got tired of that cage, and he would open up the cage during the night and come out of the cage. He was flying. He'd fly all over the house, and everywhere he flew, he left a spot. And we just made up our mind we had to get rid of this bird. We didn't want this bird in our house. And but of course, the kids still wanted it. But as the days went on, the bird got ugly. And we got to where we'd go out of that little room. We'd make sure we pulled the doors to so he couldn't get in the other parts of the house, because he could open his cage. So I finally got a clothespin, and I hooked it with the clothespin thinking he wouldn't be able to get out. But that bird knew how to get out. That bird, there wasn't no way we was keeping that bird in that cage. And it got to where he would land on our shoulders, and he'd let us know what he wanted. And if we didn't do what he wanted us to right then, he'd peck us on the ear or pull our ear real hard and just cuss. He said some of the most ugliest words I believe I ever heard. And I didn't hear them out of people, much less out of a bird. And so we really got to checking everything, trying to find out whose bird this was, because we wanted it out of our house. He was no longer a welcome visitor. He was an intruder on our life. And the kids would go out of the room and come back into the room, and if they didn't push that door completely to, that bird would get that door open, and he'd come into the other part of the house, and it didn't matter if I was cooking or if whatever I was doing, that bird would start kind of attacking us and wanting us to do what he wanted us to do. And oh, he just cussed and cussed and cussed. So it come up pretty soon. It come out in the paper that somebody had lost a bird. They had lost their parrot. Their parrot had flew off, and they couldn't find it. And if anybody found it, would they please notify them? And I told my husband, I said, Edgel, I'll never be so glad for somebody to get a bird in all of my life. And the kids was ready for that bird to go because he was mean to them. And Angela said one time, said, that bird pecks me like that again, I'm going to knock his head off. But anyway, that was an unwelcome guest in our house then. And when the man called, we called the man with the number that he had put in the paper. And we told him that we thought we had his bird. And he said, well, I'll pay you for the bird. And I said, no, sir, we don't want no pay for the bird. All we want maybe is if you'd pay us for the pen we had to buy to put him in to take care of him. And he said he'd be glad to do it. And we never was so glad to deliver a bird in all of our life. The kids never did ask for another bird. They might have asked for a dog or a cat or something like that, or a skunk or a rabbit, but they never asked for another bird. And you know, that reminds me a lot of our children today. You know, I know I've told you several stories where me and my children had our good times, and I felt like I was a friend to my children. I loved my children. I done things with my children. But there even comes a time when you're raising children that you can no longer at times be their friend. You have to be their parent. And that's the way it was with that bird. We was its friend until he got ugly, and then we couldn't be his friend no more. We had to be the ones that got rid of him. And with our children, we can't get rid of them, but sometimes we get to a place we can't let them override us. They have to learn the difference between a friend and a parent. And I believe in being friends with your children if you can be. But there comes a time in life when no has to be no. And you have to tell them what's right and what's wrong, whether they want to hear it or not. Because that's what's makes you a good parent, is the fact you know the difference between being a friend and being a parent. And today, I wish you luck with your children and being a parent. I don't mean you need to get out and abuse a child. There's ways to correct without abuse. But there's times we do have to step up and be parents. Now, you keep that chin up and you realize that sometimes you have to be a parent too. And keep your chin up, Keep a smile on your face and live for the Lord.